Today I'm going to be sharing this oil over acrylic eagle owl and giving you some updates on things that have nothing to do with this painting. Before we get started in today's painting demonstration, there are two things I wanted to share with you guys. The first is that our new merch came in. The zombie snail with words are hard on it, that printed really well. I'm really excited with how these came out. So this is available now in addition to the goldfish logo. You can check that out in the merch store. Link is in the video description. The other thing that I wanted to share with you is I'm about done upgrading the Vivarium for my dart frog. You guys know we've been talking about that in the live streams. So if you're interested in that, stick around till the end of the demonstration and I'll be sharing that with you. If you are supporters over on Patreon, make sure to head over where the 2.5-hour version of this lesson is available for you right now. If you are unfamiliar with Patreon, every single week for as little as $4 a month, you get access to a new painting or drawing lesson. If you want to check out the videos that I already have available, there are over 200. Head over to my Patreon video library. That link will be in the video description along with a free colored pencil lesson that you can watch there now. First, I started with an acrylic underpainting, and I'm just applying my acrylics. I've got some phthalo blue, some black. I ended up adding some white later on. I'm using a ton of water and a hair dryer to push that paint around. And this is going to give me a fairly unique, it's kind of like an acrylic pour, but it'll give me a unique color or background. And my goal here is just to create a random pattern. When you do this, you're not trying to completely control every single line. You're just letting the paint do what it wants to do. And I'm going to do this in several layers, letting it dry in between each layer. And I wasn't getting this quite dark enough, so I went back over, put a base of black. Now I'm going to put some more color on top of this. I used white in there, and that white mixing in with black is going to give me a very gray tone, so I'll have to put a bunch of blue on top of that so it's not too gray in the end. Dried that. Remember when you're painting, you're going to have things happen like what I had in the beginning of this, where I just wasn't getting the color quite where I wanted, so I painted it black and continued working. When you have something like that happen, keep layering. Don't just give up, and I see that happen a lot where people think, it's not working, I'm just going to throw this out and start over. Or I could just keep painting over it. You're going to have layers where you're just not real thrilled with them. Keep layering until you like that end result. And that's giving me a pretty good pattern. We're starting to get somewhere. And what happens when I build up like this, you end up getting a lot of depth in the piece because you have layers behind it that are more translucent and more opaque. You just have a huge variation when you keep layering like this. If I tried doing this in a single layer, getting the end result that I wanted in a single layer, it's not going to look right. It's not going to have the depth that this is going to get from me building like this. Once I got that in there how I wanted it, which took a good hour or so of playing around with it, I went ahead and painted the owl black just to block the blue in the background. And then I'm using tracing and transfer paper. I drew my owl out onto another piece of paper and then used tracing paper, traced it, and now I can use transfer paper to transfer that image onto the canvas. This keeps everything nice and clean so I'm not getting a bunch of eraser marks. Any erasing that I did was done on another piece of paper. So everything's super clean on my artwork, and it also helps me to make sure everything is positioned exactly how I want. If I had tried freehanding directly onto this canvas, I would have been too big, too small, too far to the left, too far to the right. It just wouldn't have been quite right. So by using the tracing and transfer paper method, I'm able to control better what that end result is. Now I am just going to use white paint. This is titanium white. I'm going to go over everything and start creating the look of the feathers. Now I don't need these to be exact to my reference photo. That is not important. I do need to make sure that the feathers are going in about the right direction, that they're about the right size. No one's going to notice if I miss a few feathers or leave a few in or add extras, take a few out. No one cares. What I do need to make sure though is that it is going, like I said, in the right direction, about the right size. And by blocking this in with white first, I'm not having to worry about the detail of color or anything like that. I can glaze that over later, and this is going to make it a lot easier for me because I'm not worrying about painting in details at the same time that I'm worrying about getting colors right. For the eye, I'm using some red oxide. I've got a bit of, it looks like unbleached titanium white with a highlight on the bottom. Now here's where I start glazing. This paint is thinned down with water, so it's very translucent. I can go over the black areas, I can go over the white areas. I'm not trying to just get this on the feathers. It's okay for this to go over the black feathers. Some more details, and you're going to go through so many ugly stages in each painting. Don't let that discourage you. Keep building until it looks right. A common thing that people are worried about is overworking. I'm making air quotes, you can't see them, but overworking their artwork. That's not really a thing. It's a thing mostly for watercolor. For oil paint, it could be in the sense that you could overblend. But as far as overworking, adding too many layers, adding too many details, that's not really a thing. You're gonna have layers that aren't as good. So you may have a layer where you're getting to the point where like it's starting to look really good. I don't want to mess it up. I don't want to overwork it. Air quotes you can't see again. Don't worry about that because you weren't done. It doesn't matter if you mess up a layer, you have a layer that doesn't come out quite right. Keep layering until it looks how you want it to look. That concept of work being, or your paintings being overworked, it's something that's definitely been used in the wrong way, and it gets a lot of artists to basically not finish their work. One of the things, when you guys have seen me do the art critiques, one of the most common things that you will see me comment on is that the work is just not done. It's not bad, it's just not finished. So many artists get maybe a quarter of the way through their painting and call it a day. That's not good enough. That's not finished. They're worried about messing things up. What difference does it make if you mess it up? It wasn't finished. So don't be afraid of those mistakes or anything going wrong like that. Just keep layering. I mean, with painting, it's all about layering. This is not a paint by number where it needs to be perfect the first layer through. It's not going to be. You want layers, and some of those bad layers will show through the good layers, and it looks like you've got all of this detail that was basically unintentional. So those bad layers actually help you out. I find that the more layers that I do in a painting, the more realistic it looks, the more depth that you build overall. So that even counts for bad layers. So I'm using a liner brush to go back around, adding some highlights with the white here. And my color does not have to be perfect. This is just the acrylic underpainting. One of my favorite parts about doing oil over acrylic, it allows me to take advantage of the best of both worlds. Here with the acrylics, I can get these base layers done a lot faster than it would be with oils, just because the oils need time to dry. With oil paint, I use Liquin, which is a fast drying medium. So every layer is going to be dry within a day or so, at least dry enough that I can go on to my next layer. But with acrylics, I just use a hair dryer, dry it really quick, and I can go on to the next layer right away. Now I'm going to start glazing these additional layers on top of the white. Get the highlight there on the white. Now notice the highlight on the eye. I do that with a blue tone. I've used transparent mixing white with a little bit of my black, the background blue that I used. I'll put a brighter white highlight over that later. But this, see how it's kind of rounded? That's going to give me that more three-dimensional look. It takes the eye from just looking like a flat circle to a sphere. So look at that highlight, the way that curves. That's really important in your painting. Now, if you are unfamiliar with how to get a liner brush to work, I do have a video. I'll have a card pop up so you can check that out. That can help a lot. A lot of people try using markers or paint pens to get fine detail. No, just get used to using your liner brush, learn to use that, and your life will be much easier. So there is the finish of the acrylic underpainting. Now I'm going to go over everything with oil, and it's just going to add a little bit more depth because most of the colors that I'm using are going to be fairly opaque. You're still going to see the acrylic through it, but it's going to, and it doesn't catch so much in video, but in person, just the way the light refracts through each layer, you get a lot of depth that way. So starting with the eye, I want that highlight on the bottom. We'll fade that up into the darker oranges. Really, it's red oxide mixed with some black. A little bit of black up towards the upper lid. That upper lid is casting a bit of a shadow there. Now, most of the time, I'm not using flat black. I'm mixing a bit of blue in it in this case, so that it isn't just a straight flat black. I know a lot of artists will tell you never to use black paint. I personally love it, but I generally will mix another color in with it so that it's not flat, or I'll layer another color, glaze a color over it. And I'm just looking at that reference photo still to get a general idea of where those lights and darks are. For anyone interested, this reference photo comes from wildlifereferencephotos.com. I get a lot of reference photos from them. They have such a great selection. Not sponsored or anything. It's just a website I use a lot. I'll put a link to that in the video description as well. Now I'm glazing my blue. This is just my phthalo blue thinned down with liquid. And look how rich that color comes out now. So all that detail I did, it wasn't the right color. Didn't have the richness that I wanted, but that's okay because I'm just going to glaze over that. I need a little bit of black around the edges, define some of those patterns a little bit more using a mop brush to soften that out. Let's pull out a few more highlights. I'm using my zinc white for those highlights, so it's fairly translucent. Not a whole lot there. I'm adding black around the edge of the owl. I want him to just fade into the background a little bit. I don't want him to look like he's a sticker cut out from one image and put onto another, which is essentially what he is. But I want to make him feel like he's a part of that painting. So two of the things that I'm going to do to make that happen are, first, just taking some of the black from the background and pulling that into the owl on that outer edge. The other thing is I'll start pulling, and you'll see this soon, is pulling some of that phthalo blue from the background into the owl. And it just makes him feel like he's a part of the background instead of separate. And that's really important when you're changing your background on your subject. Now, right now, look how foggy everything looks. This is one of those layers where it looks way worse than it did before. That's okay. I'm softening everything out. I'm going to come back through and define these later. You'll have some layers that get worse than previous layers. That doesn't mean you've wasted time. That doesn't mean anything is wrong. Keep layering. Don't freak out. Now I can come back through with the shadow. The black paint that I use, it's Weber's Permalba. It is the darkest that I've found. I mean, it is a little bit, goes a really long way. That stuff gets super dark. So even if I'm blending it in with other wet paint, if I use the Winsor & Newton, like their Mars Black, it's going to be diluted a lot. It's not really going to make that other paint that much darker. It just kind of mixes in with it. With this, with the Weber's Permalba, it gets so dark. I can work over it and let it blend in with wet paint, and it still ends up being super, super black. I also really like the Weber's Permalba in the white. Those are the only two Weber's Permalba products that I use. I tried their other colors. Visually, they looked great. They smelled so bad I couldn't even use them. Like the smell was just weirdly strong. That was years ago. I don't know if that's changed, but it's their black and their titanium white are my must-haves for oil painting. The rest of my paints, the supplies I'm using are all listed in the video description. But the rest of the oils that I'm using are Winsor & Newton or Grumbacher. Just defining more of those again. So see how it went through that stage where it looked terrifyingly bad? We're fixing that up. We're making it look good again. Pulling that highlight back in. Now make sure with the highlight, it's not just a dot. It doesn't usually look great if your only highlight, no matter what your subject is just a dot. Usually you want that curve we were talking about earlier. And I like to do that curve especially if I've got blue in the background, but a muted blue, kind of bluish gray, just fairly translucent, but curved. That's going to give you that sphere shape of the eye, not just a dot. Using that liner brush again to come back through for these details. In the oil painting section, when I start with this, it goes pretty quickly. It's the acrylic portion that takes a bit longer, and that's why I like to do it with acrylics, because it dries faster. I know I'm going to spend more time on it, but I can do it much faster. That really would take so much longer for me to get a painting done if I did the entire thing with oil. Again, coming back through with these highlights. Now, when you're drawing birds, remember, if you really hype up the dark area and the dark shadows in between the feathers, it makes the bird look really fluffed up. That can make a bird look sick if you do that on the wrong type. Like, let's say a macaw. If it's too fluffed up, he looks like he's not feeling so hot. You want to be careful not to overdo those feathers. Or let's say you were doing a chickadee. We don't want to make each individual feather so high contrast in the definition. It just doesn't fit the texture, like the way their feathers would naturally lay. So just be aware of that. Look at your reference photo. Don't try to force extra, as much as you guys know I love contrast and hyping up contrast, don't try to force extras in certain birds. If the feathers are supposed to look sleek, it can make the bird look ill. So here you can see I glazed some of that blue from the background. Again, that's just my Liquin, my phthalo blue thinned out with the Liquin, and Liquin is my mixing medium. I use both Liquin Original and Liquin Fine Detail. Obviously the Fine Detail for when I need the tiny details. The difference between the two, the Liquin Fine Detail, it's a thinner, it's a lot thinner, so it makes it easier to get those fine details, whereas the Liquin Original is a bit thicker. And I painted just with the Liquin Original for years, so you don't have to have both, but I really do find the Liquin Fine Detail to be really convenient. Remember with that one though, because it is thinner, if you pour it on a flat palette, it just kind of puddles everywhere. So I stick it in the cap of I have like a condiment cap, I can't talk, a condiment cup, the lid for that, that's what I stick it in so that it doesn't go all over my palette. But the Liquin Fine Detail, just like Liquin Original, it'll be dry to the touch within a day. And then when everything is finished, I let this set for a couple of days, and then I put a coat of Gambar over it. That is my varnish. It's got a nice gloss varnish. It'll even out. Like if you have spots that are a little bit shinier than others, it's going to even that out. It is a wonderful, wonderful varnish, and it is going to be, you can put it on paint as soon as the paint is dry to the touch. Now that doesn't count to, let's say if you painted with a palette knife and it was super, super thick, you don't want to put this on soft paint. But in this case, I don't, everything's very thin. Everything is dry to the touch really within a day. So I give it a few extra days on top of that, but you can varnish a lot faster. If you were to varnish and use normal or like other brands of varnish, most of them will tell you that that painting needs to be dry for 6 months before you can varnish. Not really going to work out for most of us if you're selling your work, or if it's like this one, if it was a commission. So you do want to make sure that you're following the directions on whichever bottle you go with. But the Gambar, it is my absolute favorite varnish. I have nothing but good to say about that one. So much more practical than the other varnishes. Few little details there. And then sign it, and that is it for this guy. If you want to watch the 2.5-hour version of this video, make sure to head over to Patreon, where that is available for as little as $4 a month. Cletus is my Santa Isabel dart frog. I don't see him very often. Here's a photo of him from when I first put him in the tank. Once he found his favorite hiding spots, I really don't see him too often, maybe a couple of times a day. Mostly, I get to listen to him. Is that not the cutest chirp in the world? He is in the BioOrb, and it's not an ideal setup. I would not necessarily recommend this setup for, well, I wouldn't really recommend the BioOrb in general at this point. I'll do a separate video if you guys are interested. Let me know on the pros and cons, kind of compare this with the Exoterra if you are looking into setting up a vivarium. But I wanted to upgrade his setup. My local reptile store that, I don't really go to this one anymore. You guys have heard me talk about that in the live streams, but they had this complete setup, sort of this complete setup. As it turns out, they have this so absolutely, it was bad. So if you are familiar with vivariums, and I wasn't at the time that I purchased this, I mean, I was just getting started with them. What they did wrong, they had a drainage layer that was gravel, and then they put the dirt on top of it. They did not have what we would call an isolation layer. It's just a piece of screen. It's super inexpensive, and it's definitely one of those things you really need on a setup like this for the drainage layer. Otherwise, as you miss the tank and water builds up, it builds up here, and if the dirt is settling into that, your dirt ends up happening what this one was, where it was the consistency of like, I don't cook, what is the word? Brownie batter. That's what it reminded me of, this thick, almost paste. It is not an appropriate setup. I will say the springtails, which are the like the cleanup crew, they're little bugs that you intentionally want in your vivariums to clean up any, in my case, frog poop or anything like that. Breaking down leaf matter, they're really good for the tank. They seem to like it because enough stuff was dying in here. So what I've done is I ordered from Josh's Frogs. I got some new little clay balls for my substrate and a isolation layer. And I still can't get over that, like, it's just the most simple thing. Why was that? I definitely question everything from that reptile store, and the manager is the one who told me he made this. So while I was cleaning this out to remove all the bad substrate and replace it with the new stuff and a better drainage layer and all of that, I found an old reptile bowl. I found a little piece of like styrofoam or foam, something mixed into the dirt. I have a lot of questions as to why the manager, he said he made it. I would never have guessed the manager of the store was the one to put this together, because he should know better than a lot of stuff the way this was. I kind of suspect this was a trade-in from a customer and they didn't really redo everything. But that's just me guessing. I actually don't know. I just have a hard time believing that the manager's that incompetent. Although, then again, with my experience with that store so far, I guess it's possible. So I will give you a closer look of what it looks like now. I also added a couple of things. So one of the things that I love with these Exoterras is that they're really easy to access to clean the glass. And that's one of the main a huge problem I'm having with the BioOrb. You can't easily clean it. And the BioOrb is just made out of cheap plastic. So when you do wipe it down, even if you're really careful, you're just gonna scratch the glass. Well, not glass, you're gonna scratch the cheap plastic. With this is actual glass. So when I wanna clean it, I use the same glass scraper, well, a new one, but the same type of glass scraper that I use for my palette to scrape anything dirty or nasty that might be on this, which there was a lot when I got it. They did not clean this. It was kind of shocking. It was in poor condition. I cleaned it all up. Anyway, so that's one of the things that I really like with these Exoterras is they're very easy to access if you need to trim your plants, if you need to, anything you need to do in here is very easy to get to everything. The things that I added were these little Pilea tiny tears. I have cuttings from this from one of my other terrariums. I put some back all over the place. This stuff grows like crazy, so if it takes off, which it should in this environment, it will be all over. This will end up being mostly green. You won't see a lot of the brown that you've got in the background. I also added, you can't really see it. Let's see. Way back there, I've got a little blue fern, really pretty little thing. We'll see how he does. I got that one from Josh's Frogs. As much as I've been complaining about how badly done this tank was, there were a few happy surprises in here. One is right here. I've got this really pretty pink syngonium. The way they had this set up, I couldn't see that was back there. He's growing a new leaf. I guess I should focus the camera on him. Come on, focus, not on my hand. There we go. So that is a pink syngonium. I have a large version of that plant. They're beautiful. I don't know if he'll stay pink under these lights. I think these lights are a little too strong. So that guy will probably revert to green, but he'll still be healthy. And there's a lump. You can't really see it back here, but I found bulbs back there. Those are my little Pilea tiny tears. But I found bulbs of something that looks, if I had to guess, they look like bulbs from an alocasia. So I'm guessing something kind of died off. And the bulbs are still in there and look healthy. So I'm kind of hoping those grow. I'd be interested to see what they end up being because I love alocasias. We take a look in here, my bromeliads, that is these guys here. Come on, focus. There we go. He's starting to flower. There you go. These guys are flowering, which pretty much is they're not going to continue growing, but they will throw off pups. So I'll have new plants, but really, really pretty. There's some more bromeliads. I can't talk because words are hard in the background there. But there is the overall setup. We've got some leaf litter. I need to throw some more in there. I've been leaving these doors open to let the dirt air out a bit because that was gonna go really badly. So I didn't really talk about that before. The reason that you don't want, you need the isolation layer, you don't want the dirt overly saturated. If it is, your plants will die, you'll rot them out. But the soil can actually go to where it'll get like a rotten egg smell. And it'll start to smell really bad because it's rotted and not how you want to keep it. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons you want to have this set up right. So while I bought this mostly ready done, thinking I was making life easier on myself, it actually would have been easier just to build it from scratch myself. One other thing that I upgraded, and I love this about the Exoterras, if you look up here, this came with a really nasty screen top that was all rusted. Now you can clean the rust off those. That's not uncommon with the humidity, but I could not keep the humidity up on this. So I ordered, and I'll put links if anyone's interested to where I ordered these, but I ordered the lid, custom made. It's got a screen for the dart frogs. You want the higher humidity. I also got some waterproof fans that I can stick on the top. I use this on my red-eyed tree frog vivarium, and that is gonna help keep air moving in there. So while we want it to be really humid, you don't want the air to be stagnant. You could get some sick frogs, which no one wants. So I have 2 of these. We'll see what I actually end up using, if I need both of them or just one. I think just one will be enough on this tank. But that is the setup. I'm super happy with how it's coming out. So hopefully soon I'm gonna let that dirt dry out a little bit more, let everything settle in, give the Pilea, I'm probably saying that wrong, give these guys a bit of a chance to root in, and then I will move Cletus over and get him a girlfriend. Have you subscribed yet? If not, I have a handy button right there. It's round, has an orange arrow going towards it. If you click on that, that'll help you to keep up to date with all of my new art videos and apparently pet vlogs every single week.